Hi everyone, welcome back to StyleNovice and the final week of my Quilting for Beginners e-course. This is a week where we piece everything together to form your quilted blanket. So to finish your quilt you'll need both a backing piece and some polyester padding, sized 46 inches by 46 inches. Do double check the width of the roll when you're purchasing it. They do come in different widths and you want to be able to do these pieces in one piece of fabric. For the borders, you will need 6 rectangles sized 2.5 inches by 12.5 inches, 2 rectangles 2.5 inches by 40.5 inches, 2 rectangles 3.25 inches by 40.5 inches, and 2 rectangles 3.25 inches by 46 inches. For the binding, I created my own using cotton scraps of my coloured fabrics left over. The scraps were sized 3 inches by 10 inches, and altogether you're going to need a binding length of around 184 inches. So step 1 is to lay out your quilt block pieces that we've made in previous weeks in the pattern that you wish for them to appear on your final blanket. You're laying out a square 3 blocks by 3 blocks. Take your smallest white rectangles sized 2.5 inches by 12.5 inches, and we're going to make 3 columns and we're going to lay these in between each of the rows. You're going to sew your block pieces to these small rectangles, creating 3 columns. This is what you're aiming for. Next, you're going to take your rectangles sized 2.5 inches by 40.5 inches and lay these either side of your middle column. You're then going to take your 2 rectangles sized 3.25 inches by 40.5 inches and lay these on the left and right of your columns. Again, we're going to sew these on using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and this is what you're aiming for. And lastly, we have 2 pieces 3.25 inches by 46 inches left over. These go on the top and bottom of your pattern. Sewn together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, this is what you should now have. Then it's on to cutting your batting and backing fabrics. One at a time, lay your quilt top on top of your polyester and backing cottons and cut these fabrics to the size of your finished quilt top. Placing your cotton backing piece on the bottom, your cotton padding in the middle, and your block patterns on top, we're going to heavily pin all 3 layers together. So that all 3 layers stay together during washing and use, I have sewn a simple square around the central block. If you wish to do full quilting, as it's known, which is stitched designs across your blocks and or patterns, now is the time to do so. I spent so many weeks making these blocks, I didn't want to chance ruining them, so I played it safe. I just did a simple sew-in square around that central block, and that's enough to keep all my 3 layers together during wash and use. Next, we're going to create the binding, and I've taken coloured strips that I cut earlier, sewing them all together with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I've opened and ironed all seams flat. I'm then going to fold this in half and press well. I'm going to reopen it and fold the edges in halfway into the centre line. I'm then going to press and refold along the central line to create my binding. To attach my binding, I've folded the trim with one side each on each side of my quilt, and I've pinned heavily. I've then sewn along the top of the trim, being careful to catch both sides of the quilt as I do so. Now, there are many techniques for applying binding. If you wish to look up another technique or apply a different one, that is fine and up to you at this stage. Now, when you get to the corners, open the trim up again and refold over both sides of the quilt. Probably easier to understand by looking at the screen and the visual photos. Continue to sew along this edge and the others, focusing on one side and one corner at a time. Once this trim is sewn on, your final 46 inch by 46 inch square quilt should now be complete using your quilt pattern blocks from the previous 9 weeks and your homemade coloured trim. The skills you've learnt throughout this course will leave you set with the necessary skills, such as your favourite new technique is half square triangles, to make a variety of simple quilt block patterns. I hope you've enjoyed the course. Do subscribe and stick around for more tutorials.